A Bottle of Wine and a Jackhammer is the second episode of Season 8 of 2.5 Men. This is directed by James Widdoes, and as always there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. It's a solid episode. We have some forward movement with Alan and Lyndsey, but I'm not Alan's biggest fan by the end of this episode. And I'll talk more about that when we get there. This starts off with Alan and Lyndsey in bed, and Lyndsey says to Alan, "I think I love you, Alan," while he's drinking water, so he chokes, and he's kind of hesitant to say it back, but he does. And then she asked him why, which has to be the most irritating response to "I love you," and he says some reasons, and then she says to him, "I love you just because I do," and then she asks him to move in with her. I think it's too soon. They've only been dating, as they establish, for 6 months. When you're young and you don't have children, 6 months might not be the shortest time if you're going to move in with somebody, but at the same time, when you have children and there are other people's feelings to consider, inviting somebody to move in with you after 6 months, in my opinion, it just seems like a really short amount of time. Maybe if Jake and Eldridge were grown up and moved out, it would be a different story, but that's not the case. And Alan is also not necessarily enthusiastic about this either, which is an interesting response because Alan wants to be loved, he wants to be needed. And now Lyndsey is basically saying, "I want and need you to live with me." And Alan, I guess in my opinion, is having quite a surprising response to this. And in my opinion as well, not necessarily expected. He tells Charlie about this, and Alan just wants to stay. I guess it's because he loves the house, he doesn't really pay rent, whereas presumably if he moved in with Lyndsey, they'd have to split the bills. So it's maybe not the best way to look at things, but again, I'm still of the opinion that it's too soon. Charlie, though, very, very excited. He's getting his house back. He's going to encourage Alan to move out. And what happens next is fabulous, because Charlie, in the middle of the night, wakes Alan up and brings him a bird. Now, if anybody were to guess what Charlie might do to get Alan to move out, I don't think anybody would have ever guessed this. And I love it. Apparently, he's with a girl, and this bird belongs to her, but the bird needs to be watched while they're busy, so he puts the bird in Alan's room. And he tells Alan that don't go to the toilet with the door open because Larry Bird, will go after your penis because it thinks it's a giant worm. And Alan, I guess in his sleepy state, doesn't pay attention to this. He goes to the bathroom. We very clearly see that he leaves the door open. Now, I'll be honest, I feel like when Charlie said that, it felt like a lie. Maybe Alan thought it was a lie. Maybe he didn't think that the bird would do anything. So maybe that's why he left the door open. And honestly, it is scary, because the bird immediately, as soon as Alan is in the bathroom, about a second later, enough time for Alan to take his trousers off or whatever he was wearing, his underwear, the bird swoops. And I'm scared of birds. I don't mind little birds like robins, but anything the size of Larry, don't come near me. And it swoops. And it's genuinely really, really scary. It didn't work. Alan's not moving out. So we have another brilliant scene where Alan is in the shower. It's so fun. And Charlie is sitting on the toilet. Just not on the toilet, but he's sitting on the toilet seat doing the jumble in the newspaper. Alan just carries on his shower, so Charlie steps it up a notch. And all we have the camera facing Alan in the shower. Alan's kind of facing towards us, and all we see is Charlie appearing naked, or at least with his shirt off, behind Alan in the shower. And it's fabulously executed. It's so fun. It's very, very well done. And now there is one more thing that Charlie can try. They go to Judith's to pick up Jake, and while there, they happen to mention that Lyndsey McElroy has asked Alan to move in with her. And Judith realises that Lyndsey McElroy lives very close to her. There is no way Alan is doing that. And then Alan realises, oh, well, if it's going to wind up my ex-wife, I'm going to have to do it. So the plan worked. He's moving out. Charlie is very, very happy. And then we have a scene that I think is very believable. And one of the reasons why I think 6 months is too soon. They're sitting around the dinner table, Alan, Lyndsey, Jake and Eldridge, and they tell them that they're going to move in together. And the kids start arguing, and they're not having it. They're not sharing a bathroom. They're not living together. And I think it is valid. Now, granted, Jake obviously stays with Judith a lot of the time, but I feel like that's valid. Also, if they have this brilliant friendship, the worst thing you can do for that is to make them live together. It's inevitable that if you live together, granted it's not 24/7, but a lot of the time you're going to start to get on each other's nerves. Particularly as teenagers, hormones are everywhere, you need your personal space, and it will ruin their friendship. So I think Lyndsey and Alan were being kind of selfish about this. It definitely, in my opinion, wasn't the right decision and wasn't considering anybody's feelings. It would be different if they had a huge house and they had loads of space to themselves and they didn't have to see each other for a lot of the time, but obviously that's not what's going on here. Meanwhile, Charlie is packing for Alan, and Charlie goes to speak with Jake and Eldridge and basically says, you're moving out. You're moving in together, and he gives them a $500 down payment and then says that he'll give them $100 every month to split however they want, as long as they live together and keep Alan out of the house. And now they're cool with it. And Charlie is just so happy. We cut to the next scene and he's at the piano, he's merrily playing and singing along to Hit the Road Jack, which was just a joy. Jake and Alan are leaving. And we had a moment that I thought was actually quite emotional, because, not because they're moving out, but because Jake says to Alan, I'll meet you at Lyndsey's. To which Alan responds, drive safe. And I know we've seen Jake in the car before, we've seen him driving, but the thought of him going off in a car by himself and driving on his own, it's emotional to see him growing up, and it was a very emotional scene. I don't know if it was meant to, maybe I'm overthinking it, but it was quite a moving moment. And then Alan begins to reminisce about all of the times they had there, and it's clear he's not really wanting to move out. He's not wanting to leave his rent-free beach house anyway, and ultimately he does leave. And he goes to the store. Charlie actually gave him some money to get some alcohol, a way of getting him out of the house quicker. And while he's at the store, he bumps into Melissa, which is fine. You can bump into people you used to date, and they compliment each other. Again, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And then he asks her if she's seeing anybody. She says no. She asks him if he's seeing anybody, and he says no, and they kiss. And I hated it. I really, really hated it. Because Alan usually is the sensible one. Usually he is the voice of reason. Usually he doesn't do horrendous things like that. How dare he? How dare he be seconds away from moving in with Lyndsey? And now he's making out with Melissa. Okay, Alan's not perfect. He'll make mistakes. Maybe in the heat of the moment it happened. But then he takes Melissa back to Charlie's as the locksmith is there changing the lock, which I thought was very, very funny, very effective. And he tells Charlie that he's still moving in with Lyndsey, but that Charlie's house is going to be his love shack, which is definitely not what Charlie would want to hear. But I'm really disappointed. I'm really disappointed in Alan's behaviour. So it's not the most delightful end. But more than anything, I just enjoyed Charlie's range of emotions in this, mostly excitement and encouragement. They're things that we don't often see from Charlie, and that was quite delightful. So Charlie's behaviour may have been questionable, but understandable. Alan's behaviour, I don't understand. Maybe it was his way of admitting to himself that he's not ready to move in with Lyndsey. Maybe he can justify it by saying, well, my body was just instinctively telling me that I'm not ready to commit this way, and I made out with my ex in a way to tell myself this. I don't know, I'm making excuses for him. It's not justifiable. Looking forward to the next episode, and needless to say, I thought that A Bottle of Wine and a Jackhammer, while I don't agree with Alan's behaviour, was ultimately a really solid episode of 2.5 Men.